Our state and local government can and should make informed decisions and choices about curriculums for our students. In fact, the first hearing we had on this a few weeks ago, we had eyewitnesses, and when I asked them if state superintendents of education should have a say in the curriculum of students, they could not answer the question yes or no. When I asked if school boards should have a say in students' education, those witnesses could not answer yes or no. And when I asked if parents could have a say in their education of their children, those witnesses could not answer the question. But in fact, in 1982, it was the Supreme Court that recognized state legislatures and school boards are in fact empowered to establish and apply their curriculum in such a way as to transmit community values. And that makes total sense. Legislatures and school boards are directly accountable to voters and to the parents of students attending local schools. And as we often like to say up here in Washington, D.C. on the Hill, is that the government closest to the people is the government that governs best for the people. And I want to recognize that there's important work going on across the country to ensure K-12 curriculum in public schools serve our students well and prepare them for success. And there's no time like the present to be having this conversation because kids are still suffering from what we put them through in COVID-19, AKA virtual school, which was an absolute abject failure for our students across the country. At the last hearing, we talked about the importance of our freedom of speech, and it's important in our American society, especially given the attempts to stifle free speech on college campuses and across the country. And in the last hearing, I talked about a college in my own backyard where a student tried to start a nonpartisan political organization and was banned from doing that on his college campus and had to sue to establish that organization. And that should never happen in this country, whether you have an R or a D by your name, or whether you have the most far right or far left beliefs in this country. Free speech should not be stifled. I know the chairman will agree with me that when they say it aloud, you want to hear them. We want to know what folks are thinking. I'm concerned this hearing may be here today to discredit legitimate and lawful attempts to ensure our curriculums are designed to empower students to achieve their full potential. These are the things we should be focusing on. I have seen it in my own personal household. I'm a single working mom of 2 teenagers, one in high school and one in middle school, and I cannot tell you how devastating COVID-19 and virtual school has been, not only on our family, but families across the nation. And every one of our students, no matter their zip code or the color of their skin, should have the opportunity to reach their full personal and academic potential. But unfortunately, we've seen attempts to indoctrinate our young students. In fact, we saw examples of this during the pandemic. We saw teachers' unions that conspired with the far left, with some far left politicians to keep schools closed, to keep parents out of school board meetings. Parents watched their children struggle through virtual school like I myself did. We saw kids that were struggling with their mental health. We had suicides and attempted suicides and suicidal thoughts and mental health issues with our children increase over 25% during the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of these kids have not recovered. We also witnessed lesson plans being laced with divisive and radical ideologies, but make no mistake, we should be teaching our children the academic skills they need to succeed, along with the complete history of our country, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in fact, I talked about this last weekend when we were commissioning a missile destroyer named after Lieutenant General Frank E. Peterson, Jr., who was the first African-American aviator in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was the first African-American flag officer or general in the U.S. Marine Corps. He served for 38 years. He flew over 350 missions, combat missions, and received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Superior Service Medal, the Purple Heart, and any number of other commendations. I also talked about some of the rich Black history we have in the Low Country in the area that I represent, from Robert Smalls, who commandeered a Confederate ship during the Civil War and got it to Union soldiers in Beaufort and Hilton Head Island in the Low Country area. I talked about Harriet Tubman, who rescued over 700 slaves in one single night during the Civil War. I talked about the history of the first Black American to ever sit in the U.S. House of Representatives, and his name was Joseph P. Rainey. He was a Black Republican representing South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. We have so many heroes that that our children, Black, white, and other, can aspire to. These are the things we should be talking about, celebrating and teaching our kids our history, giving them hope for the future, giving them people and heroes, literal heroes to look up to and one day become. But make no mistake, as I stated earlier and in the last hearing we held on this subject, we must teach our children all of the chapters of our history. And in K through 12 classrooms, there are no places to be teaching concepts like race, essentialism, racial scapegoating, the content of a sexual nature that is not age appropriate for our young children. These are things that the vast majority of Americans can agree to. Our children's innocence should be protected and prioritized along with their potential for their personal and academic success. Our children are the most loving and forgiving among us. Our children are the ones who can teach us so many lessons about how to be fair, how to be equitable amongst those that are not. Our children should not be taught that they are oppressors or that they are victims merely based on the color of their skin. Instead, we should redouble down on our efforts to ensure our children have the foundation to achieve their best and full potential. Reading, writing, arithmetic, where too often our schools are failing our children. I look at my own state of South Carolina, where we are slated right in the smack dab middle of the amount of money that we spend per pupil in this country. And yet we are always last on education and the academic achievements of our students in this country. We have so much further we have to go, and we're not doing it. And we need to do better in terms of the way and the amount the money is spent and getting it to the classrooms and to our teachers rather than to bureaucrats that are doing a great disservice to parents and students across the country. Those students whose schools were closed the longest have suffered the most, whose parents worked outside the home, whose parents were impoverished and didn't have internet, or their kids didn't have computers to work on when schools were closed. We miserably failed our students during COVID-19. This learning loss was acute. This learning loss continues. And many of our students I know personally have not recovered. And I know this personally because I've seen it with my own family, with my own eyes, and I've seen it across students across the state of South Carolina. We have empirical data to show the losses. Studies from both Harvard and Brown University demonstrate children in virtual school had the greatest learning loss. Those students are the very students who the far left claims to care the most about, most disadvantaged, the greatest minority populations were the ones that we left behind. The far left are dismissive of the greatest increase in educational inequity in our history because it was at the hands of blue state officials. And until we acknowledge the problem they created, we cannot fix it. Now I'm concerned that we're simply not doing enough to get our students back on track. Our children's future, our country's future is at stake. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, especially about their ideas to ensure our students can reach their full potential and the many obstacles that we have created. How do we overcome them to do better for our kids and our country? Thank you, Chairman Raskin.